Hi, I'm Robin Worley, welcome to Lenscraft. Today I purchased an upgrade to Exposure Software's new Exposure X6. I was going to do a review of the various new features but then changed my mind. Instead, I'm going to use Exposure X6 to process one of my landscape photos, and in doing this I'll use some of the new features. What I really want to demonstrate is how you can use Exposure X6 as an editing tool. If you want to know about the various new features, I found a useful page on the Exposure website which I'll share in the YouTube video description. My advice as always is to download the trial version of the software to see if you like it and if it works for you. Everyone's needs and wants are different, so it won't really help you by me saying that I love the software. Before I open Exposure X6, I want to highlight that you can use it in two ways. The first is to use the browser and asset manager to organise your photo library, and then from there you can select a raw file or an image file and then launch the photo editor to adjust it. The other way to use the software is as a plugin to another package like Lightroom or Photoshop. For this video I'm using Exposure X6 as a plugin to Photoshop. Before I launch the plugin though, I've done an initial cleanup of the image which I then used to create a new consolidated image layer. I then converted the new layer for use with smart filters. Now you can use the Exposure plugin as a smart filter so that it preserves your adjustments between editing sessions. This means that if you find you don't like an adjustment, you can later reopen the Exposure software and change it. After launching the Exposure editor, we can see the editing tools on the right, which we'll look at in a moment. Over on the left, we have controls like the navigator and histogram. We also have one of the great features of Exposure, which are all the presets. Exposure comes with over 500 film simulation presets which you can use, as well as allowing you to create and save your own. To help you manage the different presets, you have tabs along the top so you can use these as filters. You can also mark presets you use a lot as favourites, as I have here. When I move my mouse pointer over a preset, the main window updates to show its effect. This can be a great way to produce new editing ideas for images. Although I'm going to edit this image in colour, I'm really surprised by how good the black and white presets look. I'm going to start my editing by applying the Fuji Neg high contrast simulation. I like the way this removes some of the yellow saturation in the midtones to give a more natural look to the image. When I click the preset, Exposure applies the adjustments to the controls on the right side of the interface. It achieves many of the preset adjustments using a combination of the colour and tone curve sections. When I pass my mouse over some of the presets again, you can see these controls changing. Whilst these controls may appear familiar if you used other editors like Lightroom, Exposure has a few additional features I find really useful. For example, you have the colour filter section, but this also allows you to control the temperature of the tint to make it warmer or cooler. If you find a combination of settings you like, you can then save it as a new preset to use in the future. Now I've already saved a cool green preset which I'll apply to this image. As you would expect with an HSL tool, you can use it to control the saturation of different colours. But you can also combine this with adjusting the level of saturation in the shadows, midtones and highlights. Something else I've noticed whilst using Exposure X6 is the speed improvements over the previous version. I can't demonstrate this, but the whole application feels more responsive, making it extremely enjoyable to use for photo editing. Whilst I'm in the colour section, I should also mention the new Advanced Colour Editor in Exposure X6. It gives a lot of control over changing colours, and at the moment, more than I've seen in any competitor. I'll be doing an in-depth video about the Advanced Colour Editor in another video in the future. At a high level though, you use the left side of the dialog to define the colours you want to target, and then on the right you set the new colour. Unlike with many other editors, you can do this by controlling the hue, saturation and luminance independently of each other. Let's close this down now, and I'll add a new layer to the image. I want to use this to select the top of the image to enhance the appearance of the mist. I'll call the new layer Mist. I then need to create the selection for the top part of the frame. To do this, I click the brush icon which opens Exposure's selection tools. I'm going to start with the half gradient to select the top part of the frame. If I turn on the mask option, you can see the selected area in red. Next, I want to refine the selection so that it only covers the lighter areas. I can do this using the Colour Constraints section at the bottom. This allows me to control the selection based on hue, saturation and luminance. For this image, I'll start with the luminance control to select the lighter tones. As I move the sliders to select the luminance range, you can see the mask overlay changing. Unfortunately, it hasn't created the selection I'd hoped for, so I'll use the hue controls now to refine it. This allows me to avoid the yellow of the leaves in the trees to the side of the image. Finally, I'll add some feathering to the selection to help blend my adjustments with the surrounding areas. I'm happy with this, so I'll turn off the mask and make the adjustments to emphasise the mist. In the layers section at the top of the screen, you can see the mist layer. I can check the effect of the layer now by turning it off and on. If the adjustments are too strong, I can reduce the opacity of the layer. The next adjustment I want to add is a vignette, which I'm going to place on a new layer by itself. I'll use the vignette to darken the edges of the frame by placing the centre on the foreground rock, making it a focal point for the viewer. Now I want to remove the vignette from some areas to make it more natural. To do this, I'll use a layer mask. I'll use the erase brush to remove the effect from the top of the frame where the mist is, and then select areas around the image. The final effect I want to add is to make brighter areas of the image glow. Again, I want to add this as a new layer so that I can control where it's applied using a mask. I'll create the glowing effect using the infrared control, where I can set the opacity and spread. The opacity controls the strength of the effect, whilst the spread controls how wide it is. Initially, I want to make this a strong adjustment to help me see the areas affected in the image. I can then use the erase brush to remove it from the foreground rocks at a low flow setting. I'll also use this to reduce the intensity of the effect in the mist, otherwise it will cause this area to blow out, which I don't want. Finally, I'll reduce the opacity of the layer to control the effect. The Before button at the top allows me to compare the starting image with the edited adjustment. I'm happy with the result, so I'll click the Apply button and return to Photoshop. As I mentioned at the start of this video, I've been looking at using Exposure X6 for landscape photo editing, but it's just as good for other styles. During the video, I've used some of the new features in Exposure 6, but much of what I've done here was already in Exposure X5. Whether Exposure X6 makes a good value upgrade really depends on your existing version and the tools you want to use. If you don't already own Exposure, I think the new X6 release is an excellent photo editor and library manager. It's well worth investigating further. The Photo Library Manager compares very well with Lightroom, and the Photo Editor is, in my opinion, much better than Lightroom. I found it very responsive, and with a little practice you can achieve some excellent results. I'm Robin Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you soon for another video.